They thought the rocky hills would be her grave of shame. When Clara's brothers filmed her walking away from the family mansion with nothing but a backpack, they laughed and called her the Queen of Gravel. They threw coins at her back and posted the video online for the world to mock. But those brothers never looked up. They only looked at their bank accounts. And in 3 days, the worthless rocks they'd given her to humiliate her became the key to their survival and the source of their downfall. Because Clara's grandmother had hidden something in those hills 50 years ago, something more valuable than all their mansions combined, something they'd need to beg for on their knees. Get ready to discover how the family joke became the family's only hope, and how silence became the most powerful weapon of all. If you believe that those who mock the humble will one day need their mercy, subscribe to this channel. Here we share stories of poetic justice that prove karma is real. Hit that like button so this story reaches someone who's been underestimated and needs to remember the last laugh belongs to the wise, not the loud, because what Clara found hidden in her grandmother's cabin wasn't just water, it was power, and she was about to teach her brothers a lesson they'd never forget. The funeral of Antonio Silva had been elegant, expensive, and empty of real grief. His children, Marcos, Ricardo, and Clara, stood by the mahogany casket in the family chapel, their faces appropriately somber for the cameras, but their eyes calculating what came next. Antonio had built an empire: real estate, manufacturing, agricultural supply. The Silva name meant wealth across 3 states of Brazil, and now, at 87, having died peacefully in his sleep, he was leaving it all behind. The question was, who would get what? 3 days after the funeral, the family gathered in the law office of Dr. Henrique Tavares for the reading of the will. The office was all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. Marcos, 58, sat in his tailored suit, legs crossed confidently. Ricardo, 56, checked his phone constantly, already mentally spending his inheritance. And Clara, 55, sat quietly in the corner, her simple dress a stark contrast to her brother's designer clothes. She'd always been the quiet one, the disappointment, the daughter who'd refused to join the family business, who'd spent years caring for their aging mother instead of building wealth, who'd never married or produced heirs to carry on the Silva name. "She's useless," Marcos had once said at a family dinner, not even bothering to lower his voice. "A waste of the Silva genes." Clara had said nothing then. She said nothing now as Dr. Tavares opened the thick envelope containing their father's final wishes. "Let us begin," the attorney said. "To my son Marcos Antonio Silva, I leave the Silva real estate holdings, including all properties, developments, and associated accounts. Current value approximately 42 million reais." Marcos smiled, a predator's smile, as it should be. "To my son Ricardo Fernando Silva, I leave Silva Manufacturing and the Agricultural Supply Division, including all factories, equipment, and distribution networks. Current value, approximately 38 million reais." Ricardo nodded, satisfied. The old man knew quality when he saw it. Both brothers turned to look at Clara, their expressions mixing pity and contempt. What would the failure sister get? Maybe the beach house? Maybe a trust fund? Dr. Tavares cleared his throat. "And to my daughter Clara Helena Silva, who always preferred silence." Both brothers leaned forward, eager to hear how small her portion would be. "I leave the land where silence is king. The rocky hills of the northern property, Section 47, approximately 200 hectares of the stone plateau." The room went silent. Then Marcos started laughing, really laughing, the kind that made his face red. "The northern hills?" he gasped. "The rocks? The useless land Dad could never sell?" Ricardo was laughing too. "That's not land, that's just 200 hectares of nothing. Can't farm it, can't build on it, can't do anything except maybe raise goats." Dr. Tavares continued reading, his professional voice betraying no emotion. "Your father's note says I'm for Clara, who sees value where others see waste, who finds meaning where others find emptiness. The hills are yours. Do with them what I know you will." "What she'll do is starve," Marcos said, pulling out his phone. "This is too perfect. Clara, stand up. Let me get a picture of the Queen of Gravel." "Marcos, that's not appropriate," Dr. Tavares began, but Marcos was already filming. "Say hi to your kingdom, Clara. The rocks await their queen." Ricardo joined in, also filming. "Don't forget your crown. Oh wait, you can't afford one anymore." Clara stood slowly. She met their cameras with calm eyes and said nothing. Just picked up the deed to her worthless hills, placed it in her simple purse and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Marcos called after her. "Aren't you going to beg us to trade? Offer to clean our houses for a share of the real inheritance?" Clara stopped at the door. "No." "No?" Ricardo laughed. "Clara, you just inherited rocks. Literally rocks. You have no income, no property worth anything. You're going to end up homeless." "Perhaps," Clara said quietly, "but at least I'll be honest." She walked out. Behind her she heard Marcos say, "Post that video everywhere. Let everyone see what happens to family members who refuse to contribute. She gets rocks. Perfect justice." By the time Clara reached the mansion to collect her belongings, the video was already online. The Queen of Gravel was trending locally. Comments poured in, mocking her, pitying her, laughing at the silver daughter who'd inherited worthless land. Clara packed a backpack with clothes, a water bottle, a flashlight, and one item she'd kept hidden for years, a silver medallion her grandmother Helena had given her before disappearing mysteriously 45 years ago. "When they laugh at you, my darling," Grandmother Helena had whispered, pressing the medallion into 6-year-old Clara's hands, "remember that those who mock don't understand. Keep this safe. Someday, you'll know where to take it." Clara had worn it hidden her entire life, a secret connection to the only person who'd ever truly loved her. As she walked out of the mansion that had never felt like home, carrying just a backpack, Marcos and Ricardo were waiting at the gate with their phones ready. "One more shot for social media," Marcos called out, and then they did something Clara would never forget. They threw coins at her. Literal coins, handfuls of change, scattering on the driveway around her feet. "Thigh grass for your goats, Queen of Gravel," Ricardo shouted, filming her reaction. Clara didn't bend to pick up the coins, didn't cry, didn't react at all. She just adjusted her backpack, looked up at the rocky hills visible in the distance, and started walking. Behind her, her brother's laughter echoed. Ahead of her, the silent hills waited. And in her pocket, her grandmother's medallion felt warm against her skin, as if it knew something her brothers didn't. The hills weren't empty. They were full of secrets. And Clara was about to discover that her grandmother's love had reached across 45 years to save her from the family that had never deserved her. The walk from the Silver Mansion to the northern hills was 12 kilometers. Clara knew because she'd looked at maps the night before, suspecting her inheritance would be something her brothers considered worthless. The first 3 kilometers were through town. Clara felt eyes on her everywhere, people checking their phones, recognizing her from the viral video, whispering to each other. A few teenagers actually pointed and laughed. "That's her, the Gravel Queen!" Clara kept walking, head high, steps steady. By kilometer 5, the paved roads gave way to dirt. By kilometer 7, she was climbing. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The sounds of town faded behind her, replaced by wind through grass and the distant cry of hawks. Clara had been to these hills only once before as a child, with Grandmother Helena. She remembered very little, just the sense of climbing forever, her grandmother's hand warm in hers, and the old woman saying, "This is where I come when the world is too loud, Clara. Remember this place. It's yours more than you know." The memory had seemed like nothing more than an old woman's wandering thoughts. But now, walking this path alone with her entire life in a backpack, Clara wondered if her grandmother had been planting seeds even then. At kilometer 10, Clara stopped to rest and drink water. She pulled out her phone, still had signal surprisingly, and there notifications flooded in. The video had spread beyond local. National media had picked it up. "Iris inherits rocks, family mocks her online." The comments were brutal. "Should have worked harder, honey. This is what happens when you don't contribute to the family." Queen of Gravel. Her brothers are savage but fair. Clara closed the app and looked up instead. The rocky hills rose before her, steep and forbidding to anyone who didn't know them. But tucked in her pocket, along with the medallion, was something she'd found this morning behind an old photograph of her grandmother in her childhood bedroom, a hand-drawn map. The map was simple, but clear, a path up the northern ridge, a grove of ancient trees marked with an X, and written in her grandmother's elegant script, "They never looked up, my darling. They only looked at their pockets. But you see differently. Follow this. Find home." Clara pulled out the map now and compared it to the landscape. There, that ridge, those trees clustered at the top, twisted and old. She was close. She shouldered her backpack and climbed. The final 2 kilometers were the hardest. The path was barely visible, overgrown with 45 years of neglect. Rocks shifted under her feet. Thorns caught her clothes. Sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cool mountain air. But Clara didn't stop, because with every step away from her brother's mockery, she felt lighter. The coins they'd thrown at her feet felt like the insult they were meant to be, but they'd also felt like release, like visible proof that she owed them nothing, that their cruelty freed her from any obligation to care what they thought. At the top of the ridge, breathing hard, Clara pushed through a final barrier of brush and found herself in a grove of trees so old they seemed to belong to another era. Their trunks were massive, twisted, roots digging into rock itself, and there, hidden so perfectly that you'd never see it unless you knew exactly where to look, was the cabin. It wasn't large, maybe 6 meters by 8. The exterior was weathered wood, almost grey with age, covered in vines and moss. It looked abandoned, worthless, ready to collapse. But the door was solid wood with iron hinges, and when Clara approached and tried the handle, it turned smoothly, as if someone had oiled it recently. The door opened without a sound. Clara stepped inside and gasped. The interior of the cabin was nothing like its exterior suggested. While the outside looked like ruins, the inside was preserved like a time capsule, and not just preserved but maintained. The main room was a workshop, a jeweler's workshop to be specific. Along one wall stood a workbench with tools carefully arranged. Files, pliers, hammers, polishing wheels. Everything was clean, organized, and clearly functional. Along another wall were shelves holding jars of stones, unpolished gems in various states of preparation. Quartz, agate, citrine, amethyst. Not valuable enough to steal, but beautiful nonetheless. A simple cot sat in one corner, with a wool blanket folded precisely. A small wood stove occupied another corner, its chimney rising through the roof. A table and 2 chairs completed the furniture, and on the table sat an oil lamp and a sealed envelope. The envelope had Clara's name written in her grandmother's distinctive handwriting. Clara set down her backpack with shaking hands and picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, preserved carefully. She opened it and pulled out a letter dated March 1980, 45 years ago, just before her grandmother disappeared. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and your father's sons have done exactly what I knew they would do. They have mocked you, dismissed you, and given you what they think is worthless. Good. It means my plan worked. Your brothers, and I'm sorry, my darling, but they are not really your brothers in spirit, inherited their father's greed and his blindness. They see money but not value. They see price but not worth. They would have destroyed you completely if I'd left you anything they recognized as valuable. So I left you this instead. The hills they despise, the rocks they mock, the land they think is useless. But Clara, my precious girl, there is no useless land, only blind eyes. This cabin was my sanctuary for 30 years. Your grandfather never knew about it. Your father never suspected. I came here to work, to think, to breathe freely away from men who measured my worth by my ability to produce sons and smile at their business partners. I was a jeweler, Clara, not a hobby jeweler, a master artisan. I sold my work under a man's name because women weren't taken seriously. I made enough money to buy these hills outright in my own name, legally separated from your grandfather's estate. These hills are yours, legally recorded in trust, waiting for you to claim them when the time was right. But the hills hold more than rocks, my darling. They hold power, In this cabin I've left you my tools, my knowledge, and my protection. Use them well. Look beneath your feet. The floor is not what it seems. All my love across the years, your grandmother Helena Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother had planned this 45 years ago, had known her sons would fail, had known Clara would be mocked, and had prepared a sanctuary. She wiped her eyes and looked down at the floor. It was made of wood planks, worn smooth with age. But now that she looked carefully, she could see that one section near the workbench didn't quite match the others. The wood grain ran in a slightly different direction. Clara knelt and ran her fingers along the seams. There, a small indentation barely visible. She pressed it. Click. A section of floor, about 1 meter square, popped up slightly. It was a trap door, counterweighted to rise when the latch released. Clara lifted it fully and stared down into darkness. Stone steps descended into the earth beneath the cabin. Her phone flashlight revealed a narrow staircase carved into living rock, leading down about 3 meters. At the bottom, a passage opened into what looked like a natural cave. Clara descended carefully, her heart pounding. The air grew cooler, damper. The stone walls glistened with moisture, and then she reached the bottom and understood everything. The passage opened into a grotto, a natural cave perhaps 5 meters across, with a ceiling that rose into darkness. But the cave wasn't empty or dead. It was alive with water. In the center of the grotto floor, water bubbled up from the earth itself, a spring, crystal clear, creating a small pool before flowing through a crack in the far wall and disappearing deeper into the mountain. Clara approached the spring and knelt beside it. The water was cool to the touch, perfectly clear, and when she cupped her hands and drank, it tasted pure and slightly sweet, with a mineral quality that suggested depth and age. This was a source spring, an aquifer breakthrough. Water from deep underground filtered through kilometers of rock, emerging here pure and constant. And as Clara looked around the grotto, she saw what else her grandmother had left: waterproof containers stacked along the walls. She opened one and found documents, geological surveys, water quality reports, legal papers. She pulled them out and began reading by her phone light. The first document was a geological survey from 1978. It identified this spring as the primary source for the entire regional aquifer, the underground water system that fed every well, every farm, every factory in the valley below. The Silva properties, along with hundreds of others, drew their water from this aquifer, which meant they drew it from this spring, which meant they drew it from Clara's land. The second document was a property deed, registered in 1975 under Helena Silva's maiden name, separating these hills legally from the family estate. The hills were never part of Antonio Silva's holdings. They'd always been Helena's, held in trust for Clara. The third document was a water rights claim filed in 1979, establishing Helena Silva as the owner of the spring and asserting her right to control its use. Clara sat back, documents spread around her, and started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, not bitter laughter, but the laughter of someone who suddenly sees a joke 45 years in the making. Her brothers had mocked her for inheriting rocks, but those rocks controlled the water, and the water controlled everything else. Grandmother Helena hadn't just left her a sanctuary, she'd left her power, the power to give or withhold the one thing her brothers' empires couldn't function without. Clara climbed back up to the cabin, her mind racing. She reread her grandmother's letter, seeing it now with new understanding. There is no useless land, only blind eyes. Her brothers were blind. They'd always been blind. They saw real estate and manufacturing and profit margins, but they'd never looked up to see where their water came from, never looked deeper to understand the source of their wealth. And now their blind sister, their useless sister, controlled that source. Clara sat at her grandmother's workbench and picked up one of the rough stones from the shelves. Quartz, cloudy and unimpressive, but in her grandmother's jars she also found polished stones, the same quartz transformed into gleaming crystals, beautiful and valuable, rough to polished, mocked to powerful, worthless to essential. Clara smiled and set the stone back down. She had work to do. Clara spent the rest of the first day exploring the full extent of her inheritance. The cabin had more secrets than she'd initially realized. Behind the workbench, she found a storage cabinet containing not just jewelry tools, but also maps, detailed, hand-drawn maps of the underground water system beneath the hills. Her grandmother had been thorough, documenting every spring, every aquifer passage, every place where water emerged or disappeared back into the earth. The main spring beneath the cabin was the largest, but there were smaller springs scattered throughout the 200 hectares. Together, they formed a network that fed the entire valley's water supply. Clara also found her grandmother's journals, dozens of them, spanning from 1965 to 1980. She sat at the table as the sun set and read by lamplight. June 1965. I've discovered the most extraordinary thing. The hills my husband considers worthless are actually the water source for his entire agricultural operation. He has no idea. He thinks his wells are independent. But I've traced the aquifer, and it all starts here, in these rocky hills he despises. August 1967. I've begun working with the stones I find here. Not for money. I have enough from my jewelry business that he still thinks is just a hobby. But for peace. When I polish these rough stones into something beautiful, I remember that transformation is always possible, that what appears worthless can become precious with the right attention. March 1970. My granddaughter Clara was born today. Antonio wanted another grandson, of course. He's barely looked at her, but I held her and saw something her father will never see. Wisdom in those eyes. Patience. The ability to see beyond surfaces. She's the one. I'm certain now. Everything I'm building here is for her. November 1978. I've hired a geologist to survey the property secretly. His report confirms what I suspected. This spring is the source for everything. Without it, the valley would dry up within months. The water rights alone make this land worth tens of millions, but more than that, it makes it powerful. Whoever controls this water controls the region's future. January 1980. I'm 71 now. Not much time left. I've registered the deed in Clara's name, held in trust until she's old enough to claim it. I've filed the water rights. I've documented everything. My sons will inherit their father's businesses, and they'll think they've won. But Clara will inherit the source. And one day when they mock her, as I know they will, she'll discover that the worthless gift was actually everything. Clara closed the journal, tears in her eyes. Her grandmother had planned this for 15 years, had watched Clara grow up, had seen her brother's cruelty, and had quietly prepared a rescue that would only activate when Clara needed it most. The next morning, Clara woke early and descended back into the grotto. In daylight, filtering down from ventilation shafts her grandmother had cleverly hidden among the rocks, the spring was even more beautiful. The water sparkled, clear as glass, bubbling up endlessly from the deep. Clara found the water quality reports and read them carefully. The water was exceptional, naturally filtered, mineral-rich, alkaline. The reports noted its potential therapeutic properties due to its unique mineral composition. Springs like this were rare enough to be considered precious, but more than its quality, it was its quantity and position that mattered. The geological surveys showed that this spring fed into an underground river that branched into at least 12 major channels, each supplying a different section of the valley below. The silver real estate developments relied on wells tapping Aquifer Channel 3. The silver manufacturing plants relied on Channel 7. The agricultural lands relied on Channels 2, 5, and 9. All of them ultimately drew from this source. Clara climbed back to the cabin and found the radio her grandmother had mentioned in a note. It was an old shortwave radio, carefully preserved, and, when Clara checked, still functional. There were instructions on how to reach a lawyer in the capital, a man named Dr. Paulo Mendes, who had worked with her grandmother in the 1970s. Clara turned on the radio, adjusted the frequency, and transmitted on the emergency channel her grandmother had specified. "This is Clara Silva calling for Dr. Paulo Mendes. I'm at the Northern Hills property. My grandmother Helena Silva left instructions to contact you. Please respond. She waited. Static. Then, "This is Paulo Mendes. Clara Silva. I've been waiting 45 years for this call. Your grandmother was my client and my friend. She told me that one day her granddaughter would need help reclaiming what was rightfully hers. I have documents ready. Tell me, have you found the spring?" "Yes," Clara said. "I've found everything." "Then we can proceed. I need you to photograph the property deed, the water rights claim, and the geological surveys. Send them to my office via the satellite phone your grandmother left in the cabin. You'll find it in the cabinet marked Communications. Once I have those, I can begin the legal process." "What legal process?" Clara asked. "Declaring these hills a protected water source," Paulo said. "Your grandmother filed the preliminary paperwork in 1979, but it was never activated. She wanted you to be the one to decide when the time was right. Once declared, all commercial entities drawing water from this aquifer will be required to register, pay usage fees, and comply with conservation regulations. The fees go to the landowner, you, and non-compliance results in water access being revoked." Clara felt her breath catch. "How much are we talking about in fees?" "Based on current commercial water usage rates and the number of entities depending on this aquifer. Conservatively, 2 to 3 million Rs per year. Possibly more if you negotiate higher rates with larger users. And my brother's companies would be among the largest users. Without access to this water, their operations would become unsustainable within 72 hours. Clara was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Start the process. I want the declaration filed immediately." "I'll begin today," Paulo said. "Clara, your grandmother would be very proud. She knew you'd use this power wisely." After the call, Clara spent the rest of the day working. She found her grandmother's jewelry tools and selected several rough stones from the collection. She'd learned basic jewelry making as a teenager, taking classes her brothers had mocked as useless hobbies. Now she put those skills to use. She worked slowly, carefully, polishing rough quartz into gleaming crystals. It was meditative work, transforming something dismissed as worthless into something beautiful. As she worked, she thought about her brothers, Marcos with his 42 million in real estate, Ricardo with his 38 million in manufacturing. Both of them had mocked her, humiliated her, thrown coins at her feet. But in 3 days, they'd learned that all their millions depended on something they'd dismissed as worthless rocks. They'd learned that their useless sister controlled their futures, and they'd learn it the hard way. Over the next 3 days, Clara transformed, not just internally but visibly. She found that the spring water had the thermal properties mentioned in the geological reports: warm, mineral-rich, therapeutic. There was a natural basin in the grotto where the water pooled before flowing onward, and Clara bathed there each day, washing away years of exhaustion and humiliation. The water seemed to restore something in her. Her skin cleared. Her hair, which had been dull and grey, took on a silver sheen. Her eyes, which had carried perpetual tiredness, became clear and focused. But the real transformation was internal. For 55 years, Clara had absorbed her family's judgment, had believed on some level that maybe she was the disappointment they said she was, that maybe her quietness was weakness, that maybe her choice to care for her mother instead of building wealth was a failure. But here in her grandmother's sanctuary, working with her grandmother's tools, Clara finally understood. She hadn't failed. She'd succeeded at something her brothers couldn't understand. She'd remained human. She'd chosen love over profit. And now, impossibly, that choice was rewarded. She wasn't the queen of gravel her brothers had mockingly named her. She was the queen of the source, the keeper of what mattered most. Clara spent hours each day polishing stones. It was slow work, taking rough chunks of quartz and amethyst and transforming them through patient grinding, sanding and buffing into polished gems that caught the light and threw rainbows. She created a necklace from her best work, 7 stones, each one representing a different lesson her grandmother had tried to teach her family: patience, humility, vision, respect, compassion, wisdom, love. The center stone was the largest, a piece of clear quartz she'd found in the grotto that had taken 2 full days to polish. It was flawless, brilliant, and when she held it up to the light, it seemed to glow from within. Clara strung the stones on a silver chain she found in her grandmother's supplies and wore it around her neck. It felt right, powerful not because of its monetary value, the stones were semi-precious at best, but because she'd made it herself. Because it represented transformation. On the evening of the 3rd day, Paolo called on the radio. "It's done," he said. "The declaration is official. As of noon today, the Northern Hills water source is a registered protected environmental area. All commercial entities drawing from its aquifer are now required to register and pay usage fees. I've sent notifications to every registered business in the valley, including silver real estate and silver manufacturing." "How long until they understand what's happening?" Clara asked. "About 72 hours. That's how long it takes for the water authority to process the registrations and begin enforcement. Any business that fails to register and pay fees will have their water access legally revoked. The penalties for illegal usage are severe: fines, injunctions, even criminal charges for the owners. And my brothers will receive their notifications tomorrow morning, along with the fee schedules and the name of the landowner they'll be paying. Clara Helena Silva." Clara smiled. "How much are their company's fees?" "Silver Real Estate draws approximately 40,000 cubic meters per month at the mandated rate of 30 reais per cubic meter for commercial use. That's 1.2 million reais monthly. Silver Manufacturing draws 60,000 cubic meters. That's 1.8 million monthly. Combined, your brothers will owe you approximately 3 million reais per month for water access, 36 million per year." Clara did the math. Her brothers had inherited 80 million reais in assets, but without water, those assets were worthless. And now to keep those assets functional, they'd have to pay her 36 million per year. Within 3 years, she'd have earned more from her worthless rocks than they'd inherited outright. "There's something else," Paolo said. "The government is interested in purchasing a conservation easement on your land. They want to protect the water source permanently. They're offering 25 million reais for a 99-year easement that would restrict development but allow you to retain ownership and collect water usage fees." "Why would I do that?" Clara asked. "Because it would give you immediate capital while ensuring the spring remains protected. You'd still control the water rights. You'd still collect fees. But you'd also have 25 million in cash and the government's legal protection against anyone who might try to challenge your ownership or access the water illegally." Clara thought about it. 25 million reais. More than she'd ever imagined having. And she'd still control the water, still have the power to set terms. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I want to wait until my brothers understand their situation first." "Wise," Paolo said. "Let them sweat. Let them realize what they've lost. Then you can decide how merciful you want to be." That night, Clara stood on the small porch of the cabin and looked down at the valley below. She could see lights from the town, from her brother's factories and developments, all of it depending on water that flowed from beneath her feet. She'd been mocked, humiliated, dismissed as worthless, but she'd survived. More than survived. She'd discovered her inheritance, her power, and her purpose. Tomorrow her brothers would receive notifications that would change everything. And Clara would be ready, not for revenge. She didn't want revenge, but for justice. For them to finally understand that what they'd dismissed as worthless was actually essential, that what they'd mocked was actually powerful, that the sister they'd humiliated held their futures in her hands. Clara touched the necklace she'd made, feeling the smooth stones she'd polished, rough to refined, mocked to powerful, lost to found. She was ready. Clara didn't have to wait long to see the panic begin. On the morning of the 4th day, she descended to the valley using a different path, one that allowed her to reach the town without being seen. She bought a cheap burner phone and created a new social media account. Then she searched for her brothers' names. The first posts appeared around 10 a.m. Marcos da Silva, dealing with bureaucratic nonsense today, some absurd water fee notification, lawyers handling it. Ricardo Silva, When did using your own water become something you have to pay for? This country. By noon, the posts became more frantic. Marcos A. Silva. This water fee is millions per month. This has to be an error. Someone's getting fired. Ricardo Silva. Just spoke with Water Authority. They say it's legit. The source is now protected land. We have to pay to access the aquifer. This is insane. By 2 p.m., both brothers had gone silent on social media. But Clara found posts from their employees, business partners, and local media. ICE Local Biz Daily. Breaking. Major Silva family businesses facing water access crisis. Protected source declaration threatens operations. Employee Silva 123. They just called emergency meeting. We might shut down if this isn't resolved. What's happening? Valley News. Silva Real Estate and Manufacturing notified they owe millions in monthly fees to access water from newly protected Northern Hills source. Owner of source, Clara Silva, the daughter who inherited worthless rocks last week. That last post had gone viral. Comments flooded in. Plot twist of the century. The gravel queen controls the water. Her brothers must be dying right now. Karma is real. Clara closed the phone and walked back up to her cabin. She didn't need to see more. She knew exactly what was happening. By evening, her brothers were knocking on her cabin door. Clara had heard their vehicles long before they arrived. Expensive SUVs grinding up the rough mountain road, engines straining against the grade. She'd watched from her window as Marcos and Ricardo emerged from their vehicles, both in business suits that looked absurd in the wilderness, both red-faced from a mixture of exertion and rage. They stomped up to her cabin door and pounded on it. "Clara, open this door. We need to talk." Clara waited a full minute. Then she opened the door and stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. She'd dressed carefully for this moment, her simple but clean clothes, her silver hair pulled back, and the necklace she'd made prominent around her neck. "Hello, Marcos." "Ricardo, what brings you to my rocks?" Marcos pushed forward. "You know exactly what brings us here. This water fee notification. This is some kind of scam. You're not really the owner of the Northern Hills water source." Clara finished calmly. "Yes, I am. Grandmother Helena bought this land in 1975, legally separated from father's estate. She registered the water rights in 1979. She left everything to me in trust. The declaration was filed 3 days ago. It's all legal, all documented, all official." Ricardo pulled out papers. "This says we owe 3 million reais per month. That's 36 million per year. That's insane. That's the mandated commercial rate for water usage," Clara said. "If you think it's too expensive, you're welcome to find another water source. Of course, there isn't one. Your wells all draw from the aquifer that originates here. So your options are pay the fees or shut down your businesses." "You can't do this," Marcos said, his voice dangerous. "We're family." "You threw coins at me," Clara said quietly. "You filmed me and called me the Queen of Gravel. You posted videos mocking me. You told me I was worthless. So no, Marcos, we're not family. We're related, but we're not family." "Clara, be reasonable," Ricardo tried. "We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. You meant every word, every laugh, every coin, and now you need something from me, and you expect me to just give it to you because we share DNA." Both brothers looked at each other, realizing their usual intimidation tactics weren't working. "What do you want?" Marcos finally asked. "Money? A percentage of the businesses? Name your price." Clara smiled. "I don't want money from you. I have money now, more than I need. The government is offering me 25 million for a conservation easement, and your companies will pay me 36 million per year in water fees. I'm fine." "Then what?" Ricardo demanded. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything," Clara said. "I'm simply claiming what's mine. Grandmother Helena left me this land, this water, this power. You two inherited father's businesses. And now you're discovering that his businesses depend on my inheritance. That's not my fault. That's just karma." She stepped back to close the door. "Gentlemen, you have 72 hours to register with the Water Authority and submit your first payment. If you don't, your water access will be legally revoked. I suggest you stop wasting time arguing with me and start figuring out how to afford your fees. Clara! Marcos shouted, but she'd already closed the door. Through the window, she watched them stand there in fury and disbelief for several minutes, before finally returning to their vehicles and driving away. Clara sat at her grandmother's workbench and picked up a rough stone. She began polishing it, the rhythmic motion calming, meditative. Her brothers would be back. She knew that, but next time they'd be humbler. Next time they'd be desperate, and next time Clara would be ready to offer them something they'd never offered her: mercy. But mercy on her terms. 48 hours later, Marcos and Ricardo returned, but this time they didn't arrive with rage and demands. They arrived with defeat written across their faces. Clara was on her cabin's small porch, polishing the final stone for a second necklace, when she heard their vehicles. She didn't stand, didn't acknowledge them, just kept working as they climbed out and approached. "Clara," Marcos said. His voice was different, smaller. "We need to talk." "Then talk," Clara said, not looking up from her work. Ricardo stepped forward. We can't pay the fees. Not monthly. We don't have that kind of liquid capital. Our assets are tied up in properties and equipment. If we liquidate to pay you, we'll destroy the businesses. And if we don't pay, the water gets cut off and we still lose everything." "That sounds like poor financial planning," Clara said. "Clara, please." Marcos actually said please. "We're desperate. In 3 days, if we don't pay, the water authority shuts us down. We'll lose everything. 40,000 employees will lose their jobs. Our suppliers will go bankrupt. The economic impact on the valley will be catastrophic." Clara finally looked up. "And you expect me to care because we're family," Ricardo tried weakly. "No," Clara said. "Try again." Marcos swallowed hard. Because we were wrong. We were cruel to you. We humiliated you. We treated you like garbage when you'd spent years caring for Mother while we couldn't be bothered. You deserved better, and instead of acknowledging that, we mocked you even more when Father died. We're sorry." It was, Clara thought, possibly the first genuine apology either brother had ever given. "Sorry isn't enough," Clara said. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust." "Then what do you want?" Ricardo asked desperately. "Tell us. We'll do anything." Clara set down her tools and stood. She walked to the edge of the porch, looking down at the valley where their empires were crumbling. "Here's what I want," she said. "The Silver family mansion, the one you kicked me out of. I want it converted into an orphanage. A real one, properly funded, with excellent staff and facilities. You'll provide the initial conversion funding and 2 million reais per year in operating costs." "That's our family home," Marcos said. "It's a building you use to show off your wealth," Clara corrected. "Make it useful for once. Help children who have even less than I had." "Fine," Ricardo said quickly. "We can do that. What else?" "You'll both work there," Clara continued. "Not as executives, not as board members, as actual staff, administrators. You'll learn what it means to serve people instead of use them. You'll do this for 1 year, minimum. No salary, just volunteer work. And at the end of that year, if the orphanage director gives me a report that you've genuinely helped, I'll reduce your water fees by 50%. Both brothers stared at her. "You want us to work at an orphanage?" Marcos said slowly. "For free? For a year?" "Yes," Clara said. "Or you can refuse, lose access to water in 12 hours, and watch your businesses collapse. Your choice." "That's blackmail," Ricardo said. "No," Clara said. "That's consequences. You wanted everything handed to you. You wanted to mock and dismiss anyone who wasn't immediately profitable. Now you're learning that the world doesn't work that way, that sometimes the people you dismiss have power you never imagined, and sometimes they're more merciful than you deserve." She pulled out papers Paulo had prepared. "This is the contract. You sign, you get water access at a reduced rate of 1 million per month instead of 3. Still expensive, but manageable. In exchange, you convert the mansion, fund the orphanage, and work there for 1 year. After that year, if you've genuinely changed, we can discuss further reductions or long-term arrangements." "And if we refuse?" Marcos asked. Then I accept the government's 25 million offer, seal this spring permanently, and watch your companies die. Then I use my wealth to buy your assets at bankruptcy prices and convert them into something useful. Either way, I win. But this way you have a chance to rebuild, to become better people, to actually contribute something meaningful to the world. Clara handed them the contract. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. Sign and send it to Dr. Paulo Mendes, or lose everything. Your choice. She turned and walked back into the cabin, closing the door behind her. Through the window, she watched her brothers stand on her porch, reading the contract, arguing in whispers, and finally, slowly, nodding to each other. They'd sign. She knew they would, because they had no choice. But Clara also knew that this wasn't really about forcing them to change. It was about giving them the opportunity to become better than they were. Whether they took that opportunity was up to them. She'd done what her grandmother had taught her. She'd seen value where others saw waste. She'd found power in dismissal, and she'd chosen mercy over revenge. The rest was up to Marcos and Ricardo. 3 months later, Clara stood on her cabin porch at sunset and looked down at the valley she'd come to know better than she ever had before. The contract had been signed. The mansion was being converted. Clara had visited last week to approve the architectural plans. The orphanage would open in 2 months, with capacity for 60 children and a staff of 20. And Marcos and Ricardo, they'd started their year of service. Clara received weekly reports from the temporary director, overseeing the conversion. The reports were surprising. Week 4. Marcos Silva spent 40 hours this week on site, coordinating with contractors and reviewing budgets. He's surprisingly effective when he's not trying to squeeze maximum profit. He actually listened to the staff's suggestions about child-friendly design. Week 8. Ricardo Silva has taken an interest in the educational program planning. He's been researching best practices for trauma-informed care. Yesterday I saw him sketching out ideas for a library. He seems genuinely engaged. Week 12. Both Silva brothers attended a training session on working with children who've experienced neglect. Marcos teared up during the session about attachment disorders. Afterward, he asked me if there was anything else he should read to understand these kids better. Clara didn't know if the changes were genuine or performed, but they were changes, and that was something. The water fees were coming in regularly, 1 million per month from her brother's companies, plus fees from dozens of other businesses in the valley. Clara's bank account had grown from nothing to 15 million reais in 3 months, more money than she'd ever imagined having. She'd accepted the government's conservation easement offer, adding 25 million more, 40 million reais total, enough to live on for several lifetimes. But Clara didn't want to just live. She wanted to build something meaningful. She'd started the Helena Silva Foundation, named for her grandmother. The foundation provided grants to women starting small businesses, funded education for children from low-income families, and supported environmental conservation projects. Clara had hired a small staff and was working with Paulo to establish programs across the region. The viral video of her brothers mocking her had been recontextualized. New videos had emerged. Gravel Queen becomes Water Queen. How the sister they mocked saved them. The woman who turned rocks into power. Clara had been interviewed by national media. She'd told her story simply, without embellishment. Her grandmother's love, her brother's cruelty, and the discovery that what seemed worthless was actually essential. The story had resonated. Letters poured in from people who'd been dismissed, underestimated, mocked. People who saw themselves in Clara and drew strength from her survival. Clara answered as many letters as she could. She told them what her grandmother had taught her. There is no useless land, only blind eyes. There is no worthless person, only limited vision. And sometimes, the thing that seems like your greatest weakness is actually your greatest strength. On this particular evening, as the sun set over the valley and turned the rocky hills gold, Clara heard a vehicle approaching. She tensed. Visitors were rare but relaxed when she saw it was Paulo's car. The lawyer climbed out smiling. "Clara, I have news. Good news, I hope. Very good. The orphanage director just sent her 3-month report on your brothers. Would you like to hear it? Clara nodded and Paulo read from his tablet. Marcos and Ricardo Silva have completed their first quarter of service at the Silva family orphanage. Initial skepticism about their commitment has given way to cautious optimism. Marcos has proven to be an effective administrator, applying his business skills to operations and fundraising in ways that genuinely serve the mission rather than his ego. Ricardo has shown unexpected aptitude for educational program development and has formed positive relationships with several of the older children. While both men still have significant personal growth needed, their current trajectory suggests the potential for genuine transformation. Recommendation: continue monitoring but acknowledge progress made. Paulo looked up. She's recommending you keep them to the contract, but consider extending the reduced water fees beyond the first year if they continue to improve. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell her I agree, but I want to add something to the arrangement." "What's that?" "Once the orphanage is operational, I want to endow it permanently. 5 million Ries to create a fund that ensures it never has to worry about operating costs. And I want to do the same for 3 more orphanages in other cities." Paulo smiled. "Your grandmother would be very proud." "I hope so," Clara said. "I hope she's somewhere knowing that her plan worked, that the granddaughter she protected finally found her power and chose to use it well." "I think she knew all along," Paulo said. "She planned for 15 years. She didn't just leave you money or property. She left you a test, a challenge, and you passed." After Paulo left, Clara walked down to the grotto. She did this every evening now, a ritual of gratitude. She stood beside the spring, listening to water bubble up from the deep earth, endless and pure. This spring, this source, had saved her, not just financially but spiritually. It had proven that she wasn't worthless, that her grandmother's love had been real, that patience and kindness could overcome cruelty and greed. Clara knelt and dipped her hands in the water, letting it flow through her fingers. She thought about her brothers, working at the orphanage, about the children who would be helped, about the women starting businesses with foundation grants, about everyone whose lives would be touched by the power of this hidden spring. "Thank you, grandmother," Clara whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for planning when I couldn't. Thank you for loving me enough to save me." The water continued its eternal flow, indifferent and perfect. And Clara, who'd once been mocked as the Queen of Gravel, stood and walked back to her cabin, her sanctuary, her inheritance, her home. She'd been given rocks, but those rocks had become a foundation, not just for wealth, but for purpose, not just for survival, but for thriving. And every day, as water flowed from the mountain to the valley below, it carried a message her brothers were finally learning. The last shall be first. The mocked shall be exalted, and those who seek to humiliate the humble will one day kneel and beg for mercy from the very person they despised. Clara had given them that mercy, not because they deserved it, but because her grandmother had taught her that power without compassion is tyranny, and justice without mercy is revenge. She'd chosen a better path, the path of the source, giving freely, flowing constantly, sustaining life without demanding gratitude, and in that choice, Clara had finally become exactly what she was always meant to be, not the Queen of Gravel, but the Queen of Grace. If Clara's story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share powerful stories every week about people who turned humiliation into triumph and discovered that what was mocked was actually miraculous. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated? Has your family dismissed something you valued? Share your story. Someone reading might need to hear it today. Clara and her grandmother Helena teach us profound truths about vision, patience, and power. They teach us that true wealth isn't always visible. Helena could have flaunted her jewelry business, her separate wealth, her ownership of the hills. Instead, she worked quietly, planned patiently, and protected what mattered most, her granddaughter. She understood that sometimes the greatest power is the power your enemies don't see coming. They teach us that mockery reveals more about the mocker than the mocked. When Marcos and Ricardo threw coins at Clara, They revealed their own spiritual poverty. They measured worth in money and couldn't see value in patience, compassion, or love. Their blindness became their downfall. Most importantly, they teach us that mercy is the ultimate power move. Clara could have destroyed her brothers. She had every right and every means. Instead, she gave them a path to redemption. She transformed her power into an opportunity for them to become better people. That's not weakness, that's strength of the highest order. For anyone who's been mocked, dismissed, or told they're worthless, remember Clara. Remember that those who laugh at you today might need you tomorrow. That what seems like nothing might be everything. That patience and kindness are not weaknesses, but strengths waiting to be revealed. And remember, there is no useless land. There is no worthless person. There is only blind vision that fails to see the source of power flowing quietly beneath the surface. Thank you for joining us for Clara's incredible journey from humiliation to power. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that the last laugh belongs to the wise, not the loud. We'll see you in the next story.